Case number 1. Alexis Nelson, the Aurora apartment horror. On a late spring day in May of 2023, a concerned grandmother in Aurora, Colorado, made a phone call that would uncover one of the most disturbing cases of child murder in the state's recent history. She hadn't seen her 5-year-old granddaughter, Mahalie Hobbs, in far too long, and something felt terribly wrong. When Aurora Police Department officers arrived to investigate the missing child report, they were met by the child's mother, 28-year-old Alexis Nelson. What Nelson told investigators during those initial interviews seemed plausible on the surface, but alarm bells immediately started ringing for experienced detectives. Nelson claimed she had given her daughter up for adoption. It was a simple explanation for why the child was nowhere to be found. But when investigators asked for documentation, for adoption papers, for the name of the agency that had handled the placement, Nelson had nothing to provide. No paperwork, no agency name, no attorney, nothing. The detectives immediately began checking with Colorado's Department of Human Services and every adoption agency in the state. They searched databases. They made calls. They followed every possible lead. And what they discovered was chilling. There was absolutely no record of Mahalie Hobbs being placed for adoption. Anywhere. With anyone. Armed with this information and growing increasingly concerned for the child's safety, investigators obtained a search warrant for Nelson's Aurora apartment. What they found inside would haunt even the most veteran officers for the rest of their careers. As officers methodically searched the residence, one investigator opened a closet door. Inside, carefully hidden away from view, were the charred remains of a small child. But the horror didn't end there. When investigators examined the apartment's fireplace, they discovered bone fragments. Small pieces of a child's skeleton that had been burned in what could only be described as an attempt to destroy evidence. The truth was undeniable and stomach-churning. Alexis Nelson had murdered her 5-year-old daughter, Mahalie Hobbs. Then, in a desperate attempt to conceal her crime, she had tried to burn the child's body, first in the fireplace and then hiding what remained in a closet, hoping no one would ever discover what she had done. Medical examiners worked painstakingly to examine the remains and determine the cause of death. Meanwhile, investigators built their case, documenting every piece of evidence, every statement Nelson had made, every lie she had told. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence against her, Nelson eventually entered into a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, tampering with a deceased human body, and attempting to influence a public servant. These charges reflected not just the taking of her daughter's life, but her extensive efforts to cover up the crime and mislead investigators. In exchange for her guilty plea, Alexis Nelson was sentenced to a total of 84 years in prison. The bulk of that sentence, 48 years, was for the murder itself. Additional consecutive terms were added for the tampering and obstruction charges. At her age, this effectively meant she would spend the rest of her natural life behind bars. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors made a point that resonated throughout the courtroom. They emphasized that if Alexis Nelson had truly wanted to give up her daughter, Colorado law provided multiple safe and legal options. The state has safe haven laws that allow parents to surrender infants anonymously at hospitals and fire stations with no questions asked. There are adoption agencies throughout the state. There are family services that help parents in crisis. Mahalie Hobbs didn't have to die. Her mother had choices, legal, safe, humane choices that would have given this little girl a chance at life, even if it wasn't with her biological mother. Instead, Alexis Nelson chose murder. She chose to take the life of a helpless 5-year-old child who depended on her for everything. And then she chose to try to literally burn away the evidence of her crime. The apartment complex where this horror occurred still stands in Aurora. Neighbors who lived nearby during that time still remember the police presence, the crime scene tape, the slow realization that something unspeakable had happened just doors away from where they lived their everyday lives. Mahalie Hobbs would be about 6 or 7 years old today if she had lived. She would be starting school, making friends, discovering the world. Instead, her short life ended at the hands of the person who should have protected her above all else. Alexis Nelson will remain in Colorado's prison system for the rest of her life. She will age behind bars, surrounded by concrete and steel, while the daughter she murdered will remain forever 5 years old, a victim of incomprehensible cruelty. If this case has affected you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. We tell these stories to honor the victims and to ensure their memories aren't forgotten. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going about child safety and protection. Case number 2. Mithialatka, the Pueblo tragedy. On the cold morning of January 31st, 2023, emergency room staff at a Pueblo, Colorado hospital received a 2-year-old boy who would never leave their care alive. The toddler arrived unresponsive, his small body bearing the unmistakable signs of severe trauma. Despite the medical team's best efforts, the child was pronounced dead, and what began as a medical emergency quickly became a criminal investigation. The child had been in the care of his mother, Mithialatka, a Pueblo woman who would soon face some of the most serious charges in Colorado's criminal code. But as investigators began piecing together the final hours and days of this toddler's life, they discovered a pattern of abuse and neglect that extended far beyond a single tragic incident. When Pueblo Police Department detectives arrived at the hospital, they immediately noticed something disturbing: the extensive bruising covering the child's body. These weren't the normal bumps and bruises that active toddlers sometimes acquire. These were injuries consistent with repeated physical abuse, the kind of trauma that speaks to prolonged suffering. Court documents filed in the case would later reveal the horrifying details of what this 2-year-old endured. According to the arrest affidavit, Latka admitted to investigators that she had held the child down, using a blanket to restrain him. She described using a hair tie on the boy and engaging in what she characterized as rough handling. Her statements to police suggested mounting frustration with the demands of caregiving, a frustration that had apparently manifested in violence against a helpless toddler. But there was another layer to this tragedy that made it even more heartbreaking. This wasn't just any 2-year-old. This was a medically fragile child with significant special needs. The boy had a tracheal tube to help him breathe and required specialized feeding. He was entirely dependent on his caregiver not just for love and attention, but for his very survival. Testimony presented to investigators painted a picture of long-term medical neglect. The specialized care this child required wasn't being provided. His medical needs were being ignored. And based on the evidence collected, this neglect had been ongoing for an extended period. Investigators documented everything meticulously. They photographed the child's injuries. They collected statements from medical personnel who had treated the boy. They reviewed any medical records they could obtain. And they interviewed Latka extensively, during which she made admissions that would ultimately seal her fate. Mithialatka was arrested and booked into the Pueblo County Detention Center on charges, including child abuse resulting in death. The Pueblo Police Department issued public statements confirming the arrest and the serious nature of the charges. The legal proceedings in this case have been complex, and while some details of her final conviction and sentencing haven't been fully published in accessible public records, Latka faces charges that carry the potential for life in prison. Child abuse resulting in death is one of the most serious charges in Colorado's criminal code, reflecting society's recognition that children deserve special protection under the law. What makes cases like this particularly tragic is their preventability. This child's death wasn't the result of an accident or an unforeseeable medical emergency. It was the direct result of abuse and neglect by the person responsible for his care. If Mithialatka had been overwhelmed by the demands of caring for a medically fragile child, resources existed to help. Social services, respite care programs, medical support systems, all of these were available. But instead of seeking help, the evidence suggests she took her frustration out on a defenseless 2-year-old who couldn't fight back, couldn't run away, and couldn't even properly communicate what was happening to him. He suffered, likely for a long time, before his small body finally gave out under the trauma. The Pueblo community was shaken by this case. Child abuse cases always hit communities hard, but when a child with special needs is involved, a child who required extra care, extra patience, and extra love, the sense of betrayal is even more profound. This little boy's name has been kept out of most public reporting, a small mercy to protect whatever privacy can be preserved for a child who suffered so much. But his story matters. His life mattered. And the fact that his life was cut short by abuse rather than cherished and protected represents a failure that the justice system is working to address. Mithialatka's case stands as a stark reminder that being a parent, particularly to a child with special needs, comes with immense responsibility. When that responsibility becomes overwhelming, there are ethical and legal ways to seek help. What there isn't, what there can never be, is justification for harming a child. As this case continues through the legal system, one thing remains certain: a 2-year-old boy who deserved love, care, and protection instead received abuse that cost him his life. And the woman responsible for his death will face the consequences of her actions for many years to come. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Cold Case Time if you want to stay updated on cases like this. Your engagement helps us bring awareness to these important stories. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Case number 3. Kelly Murphy, the Castle Rock double murder. Castle Rock, Colorado, is the kind of community that many people dream of living in. Located in Douglas County, between Denver and Colorado Springs, it's known for its excellent schools, family-friendly neighborhoods, and the kind of suburban safety that makes parents feel comfortable letting their kids play outside. The Founders Village neighborhood, where the Murphy family lived, epitomized this ideal. But on a spring evening in May of 2011, that sense of safety was shattered forever when 9-year-old Liam Murphy and his 6-year-old sister Madigan were murdered in their own beds, in their own home, by the person who should have protected them above all else: their mother, Kelly Lynn Murphy. The horror began with a 911 call. When Castle Rock Police Department officers arrived at the Murphy residence, they found a scene of devastating tragedy. Kelly Murphy had self-inflicted wounds, suggesting a suicide attempt. But far more horrifying was what officers discovered in the children's bedrooms. Both Liam and Madigan were found in their beds, deceased. The medical examiner would later determine that both children had been smothered. Their mother had entered their rooms while they slept, perhaps after reading them bedtime stories, perhaps after tucking them in and kissing them goodnight, and then systematically suffocated them, one after the other. As investigators began piecing together the context of this unthinkable crime, a motive emerged that made the murders even more chilling. Kelly Murphy was in the middle of a contentious divorce and custody battle with her estranged husband, the children's father. Court records documented an increasingly bitter dispute over parenting time, custody arrangements, and the future of these two children. Prosecutors would later argue, based on extensive evidence including witness statements and Murphy's own communications, that she committed these murders to prevent her ex-husband from gaining custody of the children. In her twisted reasoning, if she couldn't have her children, no one would. Rather than navigate the divorce through legal channels, rather than put her children's well-being first, rather than recognize that children can thrive in shared custody arrangements, Kelly Murphy chose murder. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary loss of control. The evidence suggested planning and deliberation. Murphy had to make a conscious choice to enter each child's bedroom. She had to physically hold down each child as they struggled to breathe. She had to watch as the life left their eyes, first one child, then the other. And then she attempted to take her own life, perhaps unable to live with what she had done, or perhaps trying to escape accountability. But she survived. And when she recovered enough to face trial, the full weight of the justice system came down upon her. During the trial, Murphy's defense attorneys attempted to argue that she had been heavily intoxicated at the time of the murders and that her true intent had been suicide, with the children's deaths being somehow connected to that suicidal state. They painted a picture of a woman in crisis, struggling with mental health issues and the stress of divorce. The jury didn't buy it. After hearing all the evidence, including testimony about the nature of the children's deaths and the circumstances surrounding them, the jury found Kelly Murphy guilty on multiple counts. Specifically, she was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder after deliberation. Additionally, because the victims were children under the age of 12 and Murphy was in a position of trust as their mother, she was also convicted of first-degree murder of a victim under 12 by a person in a position of trust. These convictions carried mandatory sentences under Colorado law. The judge had no discretion to show mercy. Kelly Murphy was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. She will spend every remaining day of her life in prison, will never be eligible for parole, and will die behind bars. The Castle Rock community was devastated. Neighbors who had seen Liam and Madigan playing in their yard, riding bikes, being normal, happy kids, struggled to comprehend what had happened. The children's father lost his kids in the most horrific way imaginable, not to an accident or illness, but to an act of intentional violence by someone he had once loved and trusted. Schools where the children had been students held memorials. Counselors were brought in to help other children process the tragedy. And the Founders Village neighborhood, which had always prided itself on being a safe place to raise families, had to reckon with the fact that the greatest danger to Liam and Madigan hadn't come from outside their home, but from within it. In the years since this tragedy, Colorado and many other states have worked to improve how family courts handle high-conflict custody cases. There's greater awareness now of the potential for violence in custody disputes, particularly when one parent shows signs of extreme possessiveness or makes statements suggesting they'd rather see their children dead than with the other parent. But for Liam and Madigan Murphy, these improvements came too late. They were 9 and 6 years old, children with their whole lives ahead of them. They should be young adults now, perhaps in college or starting their careers. Instead, their lives ended in their childhood beds at the hands of their own mother. Kelly Murphy remains incarcerated in Colorado's prison system. She has no possibility of release, no opportunity for parole, no chance to ever walk free. The state of Colorado has ensured that she will spend the rest of her natural life paying for the choice she made that terrible night in May of 2011. If these stories matter to you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to Cold Case Time. We work hard to research and present these cases with the respect they deserve. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Case number 4, Kimberly Singler, the Colorado Springs International Fugitive. Not all of the cases we're covering today have reached their final conclusion in court, but some are so extensively documented and so clearly established in their basic facts that they demand inclusion in any discussion of Colorado's most serious maternal crimes. The case of Kimberly Singler is one of those cases. On the night of December 19, 2023, Colorado Springs Police Department officers responded to a 911 call reporting a burglary at a residence in Colorado Springs. What they expected to be a routine burglary investigation turned into one of the most disturbing crime scenes many of these officers had ever encountered. When police arrived at Kimberly Singler's home, they found 2 of her children, a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, deceased. An 11-year-old child was injured but alive. Singler herself had superficial wounds, consistent with her story that the family had been attacked during a burglary. Initially, investigators treated the scene as a potential home invasion. They canvassed the neighborhood looking for witnesses. They searched for signs of forced entry. They tried to piece together what had happened in that house. But as investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies in Singler's story began to emerge. Physical evidence at the scene didn't match the burglary narrative. There were no signs that anyone had broken into the home. Valuable items that burglars typically target remained untouched. And most damning of all, when investigators were finally able to interview the surviving 11-year-old child, the girl told them something that changed the entire direction of the investigation. According to the surviving child, there had been no burglary. Instead, she told investigators that her own mother had attacked her and her siblings. The child described being attacked by Kimberly Singler in what must have been an absolutely terrifying ordeal. She had watched her mother kill her younger siblings and then survived an attack herself. Armed with this information and mounting physical evidence, investigators obtained a warrant for Kimberly Singler's arrest on charges including first-degree murder, attempted murder, and child abuse. But when they went to take her into custody, they discovered she had fled. Kimberly Singler had left Colorado. She had left the United States. And on December 30th, 2023, just 11 days after the murders, she was arrested in the United Kingdom, having fled across the Atlantic in an apparent attempt to escape prosecution. What followed was a lengthy extradition battle. Singler's attorneys in the UK fought against her return to the United States, arguing various legal grounds for why she should not be sent back to face trial in Colorado. But prosecutors assembled a compelling case for extradition, presenting evidence to UK authorities and judges demonstrating the serious nature of the charges and the strength of the evidence against her. After extended legal proceedings that stretched over months, a United Kingdom judge finally ordered Kimberly Singler's extradition to Colorado. She was returned to the United States to face multiple serious charges, including first-degree murder for the deaths of her 2 young children, attempted murder for the attack on her surviving daughter, and multiple counts of child abuse. As of the time of this documentary, Kimberly Singler awaits trial in Colorado. Under the American justice system, she is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and she will have the opportunity to present a defense. However, the evidence that has been made public through court filings and extradition proceedings is extensive and disturbing. What makes this case particularly tragic is the context in which it occurred. Like several other cases we've covered today, this appears to be connected to a custody dispute. At the time of the murders, Singler was reportedly involved in a contentious custody battle concerning her children. Investigators believe this custody dispute may have been a motivating factor in the attacks. The pattern is tragically familiar. A parent who would rather see their children dead than in the custody of the other parent or living in an arrangement the parent disapproves of. It's a twisted logic that places the parent's desires above the children's fundamental right to life. The surviving 11-year-old child, who witnessed the murders of her younger siblings and survived an attack herself, has had to live with unimaginable trauma. She lost her two younger siblings in the most violent way possible, at the hands of her own mother. She survived an attack that was clearly meant to kill her, and she had to find the courage to tell investigators what really happened, knowing that her testimony would be central to prosecuting her own mother. The resilience of child survivors in cases like this is remarkable, but it shouldn't be necessary. No child should ever have to demonstrate this kind of courage. No child should ever have to testify against their own parent in a murder trial. No child should ever have to witness their siblings being murdered. Colorado Springs is a community of about 500,000 people, home to military installations, the Air Force Academy, and thousands of families. It's another Colorado community that prides itself on being family-friendly and safe. And like Castle Rock before it, Colorado Springs had to reckon with the reality that sometimes the greatest danger to children comes from within their own homes. As Kimberly Singler's case proceeds through the court system, it will likely be months or even years before a final resolution is reached. She faces the possibility of life in prison without parole if convicted of first-degree murder. The trial will be difficult for everyone involved, particularly for the surviving child who will likely have to testify about the night her mother killed her siblings. But one way or another, justice will be pursued. The two young children who died on December 19, 2023, will have their day in court, even if they cannot be there to see it. And the community of Colorado Springs will watch carefully as the legal system works to hold Kimberly Singler accountable for what prosecutors allege she did. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. These stories are difficult to hear, but they're important to tell. Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on this case and others like it. Case number 5. Stephanie Alvarado, the Rifle Methamphetamine Tragedy. Rifle, Colorado, is a small city of about 10,000 people located in the western part of the state. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where news travels fast, and where tragedies hit the entire community hard. In December of 2019, Rifle became the scene of one of the most preventable and heartbreaking child deaths in recent Colorado history. 5-year-old Sophia Larson was a little girl with her whole life ahead of her. But on one terrible day, her life was cut short not by accident or illness, but by her mother's drug use and the catastrophic decision-making that followed. Stephanie Alvarado was Sophia's mother, and like many people across America, she struggled with substance abuse. Specifically, Alvarado used methamphetamine, a highly addictive and dangerous drug that was ravaging communities across Colorado and the nation. But Alvarado's drug use didn't just affect her own life. It created a dangerous environment for her young daughter. On the day that would ultimately cost Sophia her life, the little girl somehow ingested methamphetamine-contaminated water. According to investigators, Alvarado had been using a water bottle as part of a makeshift drug pipe, and this contaminated bottle ended up where 5-year-old Sophia could access it. We have to pause here and consider what this means. A 5-year-old child drank from what she probably thought was just a normal water bottle. Maybe she was thirsty. Maybe she saw the bottle and, as children do, simply took a drink without thinking about it. She had no way of knowing that the water in that bottle had been contaminated with a dangerous drug. She had no way of knowing that this simple act would kill her. When Sophia ingested the methamphetamine, her small body immediately began to react. Methamphetamine is dangerous for adults. For a child Sophia's size, it was catastrophic. She would have begun showing symptoms relatively quickly, possibly confusion, possibly seizures, possibly other signs of severe distress. And this is where Stephanie Alvarado's actions went from negligent to criminal. Instead of immediately calling 911, instead of rushing her daughter to the emergency room, instead of doing everything in her power to save Sophia's life, Alvarado hesitated. According to court documents, she delayed seeking medical help for hours. Why? Because she was afraid of the legal consequences. She was afraid of being arrested. She was afraid of losing custody of her daughter. So instead of prioritizing Sophia's life, instead of giving her little girl the emergency medical care that might have saved her, Stephanie Alvarado thought about herself and her own potential legal troubles. Those hours of delay were fatal. By the time Sophia finally received medical attention, it was too late. The methamphetamine had done irreversible damage to her small body. 5-year-old Sophia Larson died because she drank contaminated water and because her mother was more worried about going to jail than about saving her daughter's life. The investigation into Sophia's death was thorough and heartbreaking. Investigators documented the scene, collected evidence, and pieced together the timeline of events. They interviewed Alvarado extensively, and she eventually admitted to the delay in seeking medical care and explained her reasoning. Initially, Stephanie Alvarado was charged with child abuse resulting in death and related offenses. These are serious charges in Colorado, carrying significant prison time. But as prosecutors reviewed the evidence and considered the full scope of what had happened, they made the decision to upgrade the charges. Alvarado was subsequently charged with murder, reflecting the prosecution's belief that her actions went beyond negligence and into the realm of knowing, intentional conduct that caused her daughter's death. The legal theory was straightforward. By maintaining an environment where a child could access methamphetamine, and then by deliberately delaying life-saving medical care, Alvarado had caused Sophia's death through actions that demonstrated extreme indifference to human life. Stephanie Alvarado eventually entered a plea agreement. Rather than face a jury trial where she risked even harsher penalties, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In exchange for this plea, she was sentenced to 32 years in prison. 32 years is a long time. Stephanie Alvarado will likely be in her 60s by the time she's released, if she's released at all. She will spend decades behind bars, missing every milestone, every holiday, every opportunity for freedom. But Sophia will remain forever 5 years old, buried instead of growing up, dead instead of alive. Cases like this highlight the devastating intersection of drug addiction and child welfare. Across Colorado and the nation, children are living in homes where drugs are present, where drug paraphernalia is accessible, where parents are more focused on their next high than on keeping their children safe. And while most of these situations don't end in death, every single one represents a child at risk. The tragedy is that help was available to Stephanie Alvarado. Colorado has drug treatment programs. There are resources for parents struggling with addiction. There are safe surrender laws and family services that could have helped her get clean or could have placed Sophia in a safer environment. But accessing these resources requires acknowledging the problem and being willing to make hard choices. Instead, Alvarado continued using drugs in an environment where her daughter could be exposed. And when the worst happened, when Sophia ingested methamphetamine, Alvarado's first thought wasn't, "I need to save my daughter," but rather, "I need to avoid getting in trouble." That choice, that moment of prioritizing herself over her dying child, is what transformed this from a tragic accident into a criminal case. If Alvarado had immediately called 911, if she had rushed Sophia to the hospital, the outcome might have been different. We'll never know. What we do know is that those hours of delay cost Sophia her life. The rifle community mourned Sophia Larson. A 5-year-old child full of life and promise was gone. Another victim of the opioid and methamphetamine epidemic that continues to ravage communities across America. Her death stands as a stark reminder that drug use is never a victimless crime when children are present. Stephanie Alvarado sits in a Colorado prison today, serving her 32-year sentence. She has plenty of time to think about the choices she made, the daughter she lost, and the years of freedom she gave up. But no amount of reflection or remorse can bring Sophia back. If you found this case informative, please hit the like button and subscribe to Cold Case Time. We cover these difficult cases because they matter, because the victims deserve to be remembered, and because awareness can help prevent future tragedies. Don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe for more true crime content. Case number 6. Anna Louise England. The Boulder postpartum psychosis tragedy. Boulder, Colorado, is known for its progressive values, excellent healthcare access, and educated population. It's a college town, home to the University of Colorado, with a strong sense of community and abundant resources for families. But even in communities with every advantage, mental health crises can strike with devastating consequences. In June of 2023, Anna Louise England was a new mother struggling with something that affects thousands of women but remains poorly understood and often undiagnosed: postpartum psychosis. This rare but serious condition can cause hallucinations, delusions, severe mood swings, and a complete break from reality. Unlike postpartum depression, which is more common and generally less severe, postpartum psychosis is a psychiatric emergency that requires immediate intervention. Anna England had given birth to a baby boy just 2 months earlier. By all accounts, she wanted to be a good mother. Friends would later describe her as loving and devoted. But in the weeks following the birth, something went terribly wrong in her mind. She began experiencing symptoms of severe mental illness, likely including hallucinations and delusions that completely distorted her perception of reality. On a day in June 2023, Anna England took her 2-month-old infant son from their home and placed him in her car. She drove to a hospital parking lot in Boulder. Perhaps some part of her mind recognized that hospitals are places of help and healing, even as another part of her mind was completely disconnected from reality. In that parking lot, while suffering from what experts would later identify as severe postpartum psychosis, Anna England strangled her infant son. The baby was later pronounced dead at the hospital, just yards away from where medical professionals might have been able to save both mother and child, if only they had known what was happening. When investigators arrived and began piecing together what had happened, they quickly recognized that this case was different from many of the others we've covered today. There was no evidence of long-term abuse. There was no custody battle. There was no drug use or criminal history. What there was, instead, was a mother in the grip of severe mental illness, a woman who was so detached from reality that she was unable to recognize what she was doing. Anna England was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. As her case proceeded through the legal system, her defense attorneys and friends painted a picture of a woman who had desperately needed mental health intervention but hadn't received it in time. They described warning signs of postpartum psychosis that had gone unrecognized or untreated. They talked about hallucinations and delusions that had taken hold of England's mind in the weeks before the tragedy. Mental health experts who evaluated England confirmed that she had been suffering from severe postpartum psychosis at the time of her son's death. This condition, while extremely rare, is well documented in medical literature. Women experiencing postpartum psychosis often have no prior history of mental illness. The condition can come on suddenly, within days or weeks of childbirth, and it can escalate rapidly from mild symptoms to full psychotic breaks. The tragedy of postpartum psychosis cases is that they are highly treatable if caught in time. Medication, hospitalization, and intensive psychiatric care can usually resolve the acute psychotic episode within days or weeks. Women who receive appropriate treatment can go on to recover fully and even safely parent their children. But untreated postpartum psychosis can be lethal, either because the mother harms herself or, as in this case, because delusions lead her to harm her child. Despite the mental health context, Colorado law is clear. Mental illness can be a mitigating factor in sentencing, but it is not generally a complete defense to homicide. Anna England ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging that regardless of her mental state, she had taken her infant son's life. At her sentencing hearing, the judge considered all the circumstances: the severe mental illness, the lack of criminal history, the expressions of remorse, the statements from friends and family about who England had been before the psychosis took hold. But the judge also had to consider that an innocent infant was dead, strangled by the person who should have protected him above all else. Anna Louise England was sentenced to approximately 40 years in prison. It's a sentence that reflects both the seriousness of the crime and some degree of acknowledgement that she was not in her right mind when it occurred. She will likely be in her 70s or 80s if she lives to see release. This case raises difficult questions about maternal mental health, about our healthcare system's ability to identify and treat postpartum psychiatric emergencies, and about how the justice system should handle cases where severe mental illness plays a central role. Friends and advocates for maternal mental health have pointed to this case as an example of systemic failure. They argue that if Anna England had received appropriate screening and treatment in the weeks after her son's birth, if the warning signs of postpartum psychosis had been recognized and acted upon, this tragedy could have been prevented. They're probably right. But the law doesn't allow for what-ifs and might-have-beens. The law deals with what actually happened. And what actually happened is that a 2-month-old baby died at his mother's hands, strangled in a hospital parking lot while his mother was in the grip of psychotic delusions. Since this case, there has been increased attention to postpartum mental health in Colorado and nationally. More healthcare providers are being trained to recognize the signs of postpartum psychosis. More new mothers are being screened for mental health issues in the weeks and months after childbirth. And there's greater awareness that postpartum mental illness exists on a spectrum, from the relatively common baby blues to postpartum depression to the rare but dangerous postpartum psychosis. But for Anna England and her infant son, this increased awareness came too late. She sits in prison today, likely tormented by what she did during those weeks when her mind was not her own. And her son, who never got to grow beyond 2 months old, is gone forever. This case is a reminder that not all of the mothers we're discussing today are monsters. Some, like Anna England, were women who needed help desperately and didn't get it in time. That doesn't excuse what happened. It doesn't bring back the innocent child who died. But it does complicate our understanding of maternal crime and the many factors that can lead to tragedy. Please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to Cold Case Time. If you or someone you know is struggling with postpartum mental health issues, please seek help immediately. These stories matter, and your engagement helps us continue to tell them. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. Case number 7. Camille Wassinger-Conrad, the Highlands Ranch newborn murder. Highlands Ranch is an affluent community in Douglas County, just south of Denver. It's characterized by well-maintained neighborhoods, good schools, and the kind of suburban prosperity that many people aspire to. In early January of 2018, residents of one particular Highlands Ranch neighborhood made a discovery that would horrify the entire community and reveal a crime that had occurred right in their midst. On January 2, 2018, a neighbor discovered the body of a newborn infant that had been thrown into their backyard. The tiny body was clearly that of a newborn, perhaps just hours or days old. Police were immediately called, and what began as a shocking discovery quickly became a complex murder investigation. Investigators had to work backward from the discovery of the infant's body. Who was this child? Where had the baby come from? Who had given birth and then disposed of the infant's body like garbage? These questions drove the early stages of the investigation. Through methodical police work, investigators were eventually able to identify the infant's mother, Camille Wassinger-Conrad, a woman who lived in the same Highlands Ranch neighborhood where the infant's body had been found. As investigators pieced together what had happened, a disturbing picture emerged. Camille Wassinger-Conrad had been pregnant, but she had concealed this pregnancy from those around her. When she went into labor, she gave birth secretly at home, without medical assistance, without telling anyone what was happening. And immediately after giving birth to a healthy baby girl, Wassinger-Conrad made a choice that would define the rest of her life. Rather than seeking medical care for the newborn, rather than utilizing Colorado's safe haven law, which would have allowed her to surrender the infant anonymously at any hospital or fire station with no questions asked, rather than calling 911 or asking for help, Camille Wassinger-Conrad smothered her newborn daughter. She took a baby who had just entered the world, who had just taken her first breaths, and she deliberately suffocated her. Then, in an attempt to hide what she had done, Wassinger-Conrad threw the infant's body into a neighbor's backyard, apparently hoping it would never be connected to her. But investigators are trained to handle exactly these kinds of cases. Through DNA analysis, through canvassing the neighborhood, through interviewing residents and piecing together who had been pregnant and who had recently given birth, they were able to identify Wassinger-Conrad as the infant's mother. When confronted with the evidence, Wassinger-Conrad eventually admitted to giving birth and to causing the infant's death. She was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and first-degree murder by a person in a position of trust. The latter charge reflecting the legal recognition that a mother holds a special position of responsibility toward her newborn child. The case went to trial in Douglas County. Prosecutors presented evidence of the secret birth, the smothering of the infant, and the disposal of the body. They emphasized that Wassinger Conrad had options, legal, safe options, that would have allowed her to surrender the baby if she felt unable to parent. Colorado's safe haven law exists precisely to prevent tragedies like this one. The defense attempted to argue various mitigating factors, but the jury found the evidence overwhelming. After deliberations, they returned guilty verdicts on all charges: first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and murder by a person in a position of trust. Under Colorado law, first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence of life without parole. There is no judicial discretion, no possibility of a lesser sentence. The mandatory nature of this sentencing reflects society's determination that the most serious crimes deserve the most serious punishments. Camille Wassinger Conrad was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will never be released. She will spend every remaining day of her life in custody, growing old behind bars, while the daughter she killed will remain forever a newborn, never given a chance at life. This case highlights a tragic reality. Every year, newborn infants are killed by mothers who feel desperate, trapped, or unable to care for a child. Sometimes these are young women who hid pregnancies out of fear or shame. Sometimes they're women in difficult circumstances who see no way out. But regardless of the circumstances, these deaths are preventable. Every state in America now has some form of safe haven law. In Colorado, the law allows a parent to surrender a newborn infant, up to 72 hours old, at any hospital or fire station, no questions asked, with complete legal protection from prosecution. The parent doesn't have to give their name. They don't have to explain why they're surrendering the child. They simply hand over the baby and walk away, knowing the infant will be placed in the care of Child Protective Services and ultimately adopted by a loving family. If Camille Wassinger Conrad had driven to any hospital in the Denver metro area and walked in with her newborn daughter, if she had handed the baby to a nurse and simply said, "I can't do this," her daughter would be alive today. The infant would have been placed in foster care, then adopted. She would be about 6 years old now, probably in kindergarten or first grade, with adoptive parents who desperately wanted a child. Instead, that infant got only minutes or hours of life before being smothered and thrown away like trash. And Camille Wassinger Conrad will spend the rest of her life paying for that choice. The Highlands Ranch community was shaken by this case. Neighbors struggled with the knowledge that an infant had been murdered and discarded so close to their own homes. Parents held their own children a little tighter, and advocates for safe haven laws redoubled their efforts to ensure that every pregnant woman knows about this option. In the years since this tragedy, Colorado has worked to increase awareness of safe haven laws. Hospitals post information. There are public awareness campaigns. The goal is to ensure that no woman ever feels so desperate that she believes killing her newborn is the only option. But for one nameless infant girl who lived only briefly on January 2nd, 2018, this awareness came too late. She deserved a chance at life. She deserved to grow up, to go to school, to make friends, to experience all the joys and challenges that life offers. Instead, she got only the briefest glimpse of the world before her mother took it all away. Camille Wassinger Conrad sits in prison today, serving her mandatory life sentence. She has no possibility of parole, no chance of release, no hope of freedom. The state of Colorado has ensured that she will pay for her crime for the rest of her natural life. If this case moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. We tell these difficult stories to honor the victims and to raise awareness about issues like safe haven laws. Share this with others who might benefit from knowing these options exist, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Case number 8. Kaylee Messerly, the Moffat County exposure tragedy. Western Colorado is beautiful but unforgiving country. The landscape is dramatic, with vast stretches of backcountry that can be deadly if you're unprepared. In March of 2021, this harsh reality collided with maternal negligence in one of the most heartbreaking cases in recent Colorado history. Kaylee Messerly was a mother of 2 young daughters living in Craig, Colorado, a a small city of about 9,000 people in Moffat County. Like Stephanie Alvarado in the rifle case, Messerly struggled with drug addiction, specifically methamphetamine use. And like Alvarado, Messerly's drug use created a dangerous environment for her children. On a cold day in March 2021, Kaylee Messerly took her two young daughters into the Colorado backcountry. Exactly why she ventured into this remote area with small children remains unclear. What is clear is that she was woefully unprepared for the conditions and that her judgment was impaired by drug use. At some point during this ill-advised trip into the backcountry, Messerly's vehicle became stranded. Whether she ran out of gas, got stuck in mud or snow, or simply got lost, the result was the same. She and her two daughters were stuck in a remote area, in freezing temperatures, without adequate supplies or protection from the elements. Her daughters were 18 months old and 3 years old, a toddler and a preschooler, completely dependent on their mother for survival. As temperatures dropped and night fell, these two little girls were exposed to life-threatening cold. 18-month-old Emma, the younger daughter, did not survive. The little girl died from exposure to extreme cold, her small body unable to maintain core temperature in the frigid Colorado night. It's a horrific way to die, involving progressive hypothermia, confusion, and ultimately cardiac arrest as the body's core temperature drops to fatal levels. The 3-year-old daughter survived, but barely. By the time rescue personnel finally located Messerly and her children, the older girl had suffered such severe cold-related injuries that she required amputations. This 3-year-old child lost parts of her body, likely fingers, toes, or limbs, because her mother's choices had exposed her to conditions that caused severe frostbite and tissue death. When first responders arrived, they immediately administered drug tests to Kaylee Messerly. She tested positive for methamphetamine. She had been high while taking her daughters into the backcountry. She had been high while they became stranded. She had been high while her youngest daughter slowly froze to death. As investigators dug deeper into the case, even more disturbing facts emerged. This wasn't the first time concerns had been raised about Kaylee Messerly's parenting and drug use. Child Protective Services had received reports about the family. Red flags had been raised, but the system had failed to intervene effectively before tragedy struck. Multiple agencies would later review what had gone wrong and why these children had remained in Messerly's care despite warning signs. It's a question that haunts many child death cases. How did the system fail to protect these vulnerable children? Kaylee Messerly was arrested and charged with child abuse resulting in death for Emma's death, and child abuse causing serious bodily injury for the injuries sustained by her surviving daughter. These charges reflected the direct causal connection between Messerly's negligent and drug-impaired actions and the death of one child and severe injury to another. The case proceeded to trial. Prosecutors presented evidence of the methamphetamine use, the inadequate preparation for backcountry travel, the failure to seek help sooner, and the direct results of Messerly's choices: one dead child and one permanently maimed child. A jury found Kaylee Messerly guilty on both counts. At sentencing, the judge imposed a combined sentence of approximately 26 years in prison, reflecting the seriousness of causing a child's death and causing permanent physical injury to another child through gross negligence and drug-impaired decision-making. 26 years is a long sentence, but it may not seem long enough when you consider what happened to these two little girls. Emma was only 18 months old when she died, barely more than a baby, still learning to walk and talk, still discovering the world. Instead of growing up, she froze to death in the Colorado backcountry because her mother was high on methamphetamine and made catastrophically bad decisions. The surviving daughter will carry the physical and psychological scars of this trauma for the rest of her life. She lost her sister. She lost parts of her own body to frostbite. And she lost her mother, not to death, but to prison and to the choices that put her in prison. This case, like several others we've covered today, illustrates the devastating intersection of drug addiction and child welfare. Methamphetamine use impairs judgment, creates paranoia, and can lead to bizarre and dangerous decision-making. When people using methamphetamine are also responsible for caring for small children, the results can be fatal. The Moffat County community was devastated by this case. Craig is a small town where everyone knows everyone, and the loss of little Emma Messerly hit hard. Questions were asked about why Child Protective Services hadn't removed the children from Messerly's care earlier. Reforms were discussed. Promises were made to do better. But for Emma and her sister, those reforms came too late. One child is dead, and the other is permanently disabled, both because their mother chose methamphetamine over their safety. Kaylee Messerly sits in a Colorado prison today, serving her 26-year sentence. She has decades ahead of her to think about that March day when she took her daughters into the backcountry, about the choices she made, about the daughter who died and the daughter who survived but will never be whole. When she's finally released, she'll be in her 50s or 60s. Emma will still be dead, forever 18 months old. And her surviving daughter will be an adult, having grown up without her mother and without her sister, marked permanently by the scars of that terrible day. Drug addiction destroys lives, but it doesn't just destroy the lives of the addicts themselves. It destroys families. It destroys children. And as this case shows, it can kill. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time if you want to see more in-depth coverage of cases like this. These stories are difficult but important, and your support helps us continue to tell them. Don't forget to leave a comment and hit that subscribe button. Case number 9. Kelly R. Turner, the Olivia Gant medical abuse case. Not all child abuse involves physical violence in the traditional sense. Sometimes, abuse takes forms that are harder to recognize, harder to detect, and in some ways even more insidious because they masquerade as care. The case of Kelly Turner and her daughter Olivia Gant is one of the most disturbing examples of this type of abuse in Colorado's recent history. Olivia Gant was a young girl who, according to her mother Kelly Turner, suffered from numerous serious medical conditions. Turner claimed that Olivia had seizures, had intestinal failure requiring feeding tubes, needed a wheelchair, and suffered from various other ailments that required extensive medical intervention. For years, Kelly Turner presented herself as a devoted mother caring for a severely ill child. She took Olivia to numerous doctors. She arranged for medical procedures. She shared updates on social media about Olivia's health struggles. She even arranged for Olivia to receive a wish from Make-A-Wish Foundation, an organization that grants wishes to children with life-threatening medical conditions. The community rallied around Kelly and Olivia. People donated money to help with medical expenses. They held fundraisers. They sent cards and gifts. Everyone saw Kelly Turner as a heroic mother doing everything possible for her sick daughter. But some medical professionals began to have doubts. Olivia's symptoms didn't quite match her alleged diagnoses. Test results didn't support the severity of illness Turner claimed. And some of the treatments Turner insisted on seemed unnecessary or even harmful. What these medical professionals were starting to suspect was a form of child abuse known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, also called factitious disorder imposed on another. This is a mental health disorder in which a caregiver, usually a mother, fabricates or induces illness in a person under their care, usually a child, in order to gain attention and sympathy. In cases of Munchausen by proxy, the abuser typically has some medical knowledge and uses it to manipulate doctors and medical systems. They may exaggerate symptoms, tamper with medical tests, or even secretly give children medications or substances to make them genuinely sick. The goal is to maintain the fiction of a seriously ill child and to receive the attention, sympathy, and often financial support that comes with being the caregiver of that child. As suspicions grew about Kelly Turner's claims regarding Olivia's health, some medical professionals began documenting their concerns. But Munchausen by proxy is notoriously difficult to prove, and confronting a parent about such suspicions is complex and fraught with legal and ethical challenges. Tragically, before intervention could occur, Olivia Gant died. She was only 7 years old. Her mother claimed she had died from her various medical conditions. But investigators, now fully alerted to the possibility of medical abuse, began looking more carefully at Olivia's actual medical history versus what Kelly Turner had claimed. What they discovered was horrifying. Olivia had not been as sick as her mother claimed. Many of the procedures she had undergone were unnecessary. The feeding tubes, the medications, the treatments, many of these had been based on fabricated or exaggerated symptoms reported by Kelly Turner. Prosecutors came to believe that Olivia had essentially been tortured for years through unnecessary medical procedures, had been made to believe she was sick when she wasn't, and had ultimately died as a result of this sustained medical abuse. Rather than protecting her daughter's health, Kelly Turner had systematically undermined it. Kelly Turner was arrested and charged with multiple counts including child abuse resulting in death, theft for the fraudulent fundraising, and other related charges. The case against her detailed years of medical abuse, of doctor shopping to find physicians who would perform procedures Turner wanted, and of creating and maintaining an elaborate fiction about Olivia's health. The evidence was extensive. Medical records showed the disconnect between Olivia's actual test results and Turner's reports of symptoms. Doctors testified about their suspicions and concerns. Investigators documented the fundraising efforts based on false pretenses. And through it all, a picture emerged of a woman who had sacrificed her daughter's well-being and ultimately her life for attention and sympathy. Kelly Turner was ultimately convicted of child abuse resulting in death and related charges. She was sentenced to 16 years in prison, a sentence that reflects both the seriousness of the abuse and the complexities of prosecuting Munchausen by proxy cases, which often involve proving a pattern of behavior over years rather than a single violent act. 16 years may not seem like enough for what prosecutors described as years of torture inflicted on a defenseless child. But Munchausen by proxy cases are legally complex, and securing any conviction can be challenging. The prosecution had to prove not just that Turner had lied about Olivia's health, but that this lying constituted abuse that directly led to Olivia's death. The Olivia Gant case sparked increased awareness in Colorado's medical community about Munchausen by proxy. Healthcare providers received training on how to recognize potential cases. Protocols were developed for when multiple doctors raised concerns about a parent's claims regarding a child's health. And there was increased communication between medical facilities to track patterns that might indicate medical abuse. But for Olivia Gant, this increased awareness came too late. She spent years of her short life believing she was sick, undergoing unnecessary procedures, living with limitations that weren't medically necessary, all because her mother needed the attention and sympathy that came from having a sick child. Olivia died at 7 years old, a victim not of the diseases her mother claimed she had, but of her mother's need for attention and the system's inability to recognize and stop the abuse in time. Kelly Turner sits in prison today, serving her 16-year sentence. Unlike many of the other women we've discussed today, she will potentially be released someday. She'll still have years of life ahead of her after prison. But Olivia will remain forever 7 years old, a little girl who never got to grow up healthy and free. This case serves as a reminder that child abuse takes many forms. It's not always bruises and broken bones. Sometimes it's unnecessary medical procedures. Sometimes it's convincing a healthy child that they're sick. Sometimes it's years of psychological manipulation disguised as care. And it reminds us that we need to trust medical professionals when they raise concerns about parents' claims regarding children's health. Those suspicions might be the only thing standing between a child and years of abuse, or even death. If this case opened your eyes to a form of abuse you might not have known about before, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Awareness of issues like Munchausen by proxy can help protect children. Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Case number 10, Letitia Stotch, the Gannon Stotch murder. We end this documentary with perhaps the most well-known case on our list, one that captured national attention and sparked one of the largest search efforts in Colorado history. The murder of 11-year-old Gannon Stotch by his stepmother, Letitia Stotch, is a case that horrified the nation and demonstrated the depths of evil that can exist even in seemingly ordinary suburban families. On January 27, 2020, Gannon Stotch disappeared from his Colorado Springs home. He was 11 years old, a child in 6th grade who loved video games, who was close with his younger sister, and who trusted the adults in his life to keep him safe. His father, Albert Stotch, was a member of the National Guard. The family lived in the Lorson Ranch neighborhood, another one of those family-friendly Colorado communities that pride themselves on safety and security. Gannon's stepmother, Letitia Stotch, reported him missing, claiming he had left home and not returned. She told investigators various stories about where Gannon might have gone, suggesting he had walked to a friend's house or had run away. She participated in search efforts. She made public appeals for Gannon's safe return. She played the role of the concerned stepmother worried about her missing stepson. But investigators quickly became suspicious of Letitia's story. Her accounts of Gannon's disappearance changed. Details didn't add up. And when they began examining physical evidence and surveillance footage from the neighborhood, a very different picture emerged. Surveillance video from a neighbor's camera showed Leticia's vehicle leaving the home with Gannon in the car on the day he disappeared. But when the vehicle returned, Gannon wasn't with her. When confronted with this evidence, Leticia changed her story again, now claiming Gannon had been injured and she had taken him for medical care. But there were no medical records, no emergency room visits, no documentation of any injury. And still, Gannon was nowhere to be found. As the investigation intensified, what detectives uncovered was truly horrific. Evidence suggested that Leticia Stotch had brutally murdered Gannon in his own home, in his own bedroom. The method of killing was especially cruel. She had inflicted blunt force trauma, sharp force injuries, and had shot him. An 11-year-old child had been beaten, stabbed, and shot by his stepmother. But Leticia Stotch wasn't just a murderer. She was also a calculated criminal who worked to cover up her crime. After killing Gannon, she attempted to clean up the crime scene. She moved his body. She created false narratives about his disappearance. And she transported Gannon's remains out of state in an attempt to ensure they would never be found. The search for Gannon Stotch went on for weeks. Hundreds of volunteers combed through neighborhoods, open spaces, and wilderness areas around Colorado Springs. The National Guard helped with the search. Law enforcement from multiple agencies coordinated efforts. And the whole time, Leticia Stotch maintained her innocence, even as evidence mounted against her. Finally, in March of 2020, Gannon's body was discovered in Florida, over 1,000 miles from Colorado Springs. Leticia had transported his remains across multiple state lines and dumped them under a bridge. The autopsy confirmed what investigators had suspected. Gannon had died from multiple traumatic injuries, including blunt force trauma, sharp force injuries, and a gunshot wound. Leticia Stotch was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased body, and tampering with evidence. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Forensic evidence from the home, surveillance footage, cell phone records showing her movements, and ultimately the discovery of Gannon's body where she had left it. The trial, when it finally occurred, was emotionally devastating for everyone involved. Gannon's father, Albert Stotch, had lost his son in the most horrific way imaginable, and the person responsible was his wife, the woman he had trusted to help raise his children. Gannon's biological mother had lost her son. His sister had lost her brother and gained trauma that will likely last a lifetime. The prosecution presented a methodical case demonstrating that Leticia Stotch had deliberately murdered Gannon, likely over some perceived slight or in a moment of rage, and then had engaged in an elaborate cover-up. They showed that she had lied repeatedly to investigators, to family members, and to the public. They demonstrated that she had transported Gannon's body across state lines in a calculated effort to evade justice. The defense attempted to argue that Leticia was not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming she had dissociative identity disorder and was not responsible for her actions. They painted a picture of a woman with severe mental illness who was not in control of her behavior. The jury rejected this defense. After hearing weeks of testimony and examining the evidence, they found Leticia Stotch guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, and multiple counts of tampering with evidence and a deceased body. At sentencing, the judge imposed the maximum possible penalties: life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction, plus additional consecutive years for the other charges. Leticia Stotch will never be released. She will die in prison. The impact of Gannon's murder extends far beyond the courtroom. The Colorado Springs community was traumatized by this case. Thousands of people had participated in search efforts, hoping against hope that Gannon would be found alive. When his body was finally discovered and the truth of what had happened became clear, the collective grief was overwhelming. Schools where Gannon had been a student held memorials. His classmates struggled to understand why their friend was gone. And the Lorson Ranch neighborhood, like so many Colorado communities before it in our documentary today, had to reckon with the fact that terrible evil had occurred right in their midst. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of children in blended families. While the vast majority of step-parents are loving and protective, cases like this remind us that children can be at risk from anyone who has access to them, including family members. Gannon trusted Leticia. She was his stepmother, someone who should have protected him. Instead, she became his killer. Albert Stoch has spoken publicly about his loss and about his determination to honor Gannon's memory. He has worked to raise awareness about child safety and to support other families who have lost children to violence. It's a burden no parent should have to bear, but he has tried to find meaning in tragedy. Letitia Stoch sits in a Colorado prison today, serving her life sentence without parole. She is in her late 30s, which means she has decades ahead of her to contemplate what she did. She will grow old behind bars. She will never know freedom again. And every day for the rest of her life, she will wake up in a prison cell, a consequence of her choice to murder an innocent child. Gannon Stoch would be about 15 or 16 years old today if he were still alive. He'd be in high school, probably playing sports, hanging out with friends, navigating the teenage years. Instead, he's been dead for over 4 years, murdered when he was just 11, his life cut short by someone he trusted. This case, like all the cases we've covered today, represents a fundamental betrayal of the parent-child relationship. These 10 women, Alexis Nelson, Mithya Lotka, Kelly Murphy, Kimberly Singler, Stephanie Alvarado, Anna Louise England, Camille Wassinger-Conrad, Kaylee Messerly, Kelly Turner, and Letitia Stoch, all had children in their care. All of them betrayed that trust in the most horrific ways possible. Some of these women will die in prison. Others will spend decades behind bars before any possibility of release. But regardless of the specific length of their sentences, they share one thing in common. They took the lives of children who depended on them, and the state of Colorado has ensured they will pay dearly for those crimes. If you made it to the end of this documentary, thank you for watching. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. These are difficult stories to hear and difficult to research and present, but they matter. The victims deserve to be remembered, and awareness of these cases can help protect other children. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. The 10 cases we've covered today represent some of the darkest moments in Colorado's criminal history. From Aurora to Pueblo, from Castle Rock to Colorado Springs, from Rifle to Boulder, from Highlands Ranch to Craig, communities across the state have been touched by the horror of maternal violence. These cases span different circumstances: custody battles, drug abuse, mental illness, medical abuse, and calculated murder. But they all share the common thread of children who deserved protection and instead received violence from the very people who should have kept them safe. 20 children are dead or permanently harmed because of the 10 women we discussed today. 20 innocent lives ended or forever changed. 20 families shattered. 20 communities forced to grapple with unthinkable tragedy. The justice system has responded as strongly as it can. These women faced decades in prison or life sentences without parole. The state of Colorado has ensured that most of them will never see freedom again. But no amount of punishment can bring back the children who died. No length of prison sentence can undo the harm that was done. What we can do is remember. We can remember Mahalie Hobbs and the 2-year-old boy in Pueblo whose name we protect. We can remember Liam and Madigan Murphy. We can remember the 2 young children allegedly killed by Kimberly Singler. We can remember Sophia Larson and Anna England's infant son and Camille Wassinger-Conrad's newborn daughter. We can remember Emma Messerly. We can remember Olivia Gant. And we can remember Gannon Stoch. These children deserved better. They deserved mothers and stepmothers who protected them. They deserved to grow up safe and loved. They deserved to have lives full of possibility and promise. Instead, they got tragedy. But by telling their stories, by refusing to forget them, by demanding justice in their names, we honor their memories and work to ensure that other children are better protected. This has been Cold Case Time. Thank you for watching, and please, take care of the children in your life. Watch for warning signs. Report concerns. Trust your instincts. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between a child and tragedy is one person who's willing to speak up. If you found value in this documentary, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. Until next time, this is Cold Case Time.